Why did she always arrive before dawn? Maybe because the quiet hours didn't ask questions. Because silence never laughed at her, never dismissed her, never made her feel small. The armory was still asleep when Sarah Martinez pushed through its steel doors, the sound echoing against concrete walls that smelled faintly of oil and metal. Rows of rifles gleamed in the dim fluorescent light, like sleeping soldiers waiting for her touch. She hung her jacket on the same nail she used every morning, rolled up her sleeves and began her ritual, cleaning, checking, tuning. Every screw, every spring, every bolt had its place. Every weapon had a story. And Sarah knew them all. She wasn't a hero, at least not the kind people noticed. Her job wasn't on the front lines. She wasn't the one wearing the scope or taking the shot. She was the one who made sure the shot could be taken at all. To most, she was invisible, a name on a clipboard, a quiet figure in the corner of Fort Carson's armory, tightening barrels, replacing firing pins, calibrating optics with almost surgical precision. But in her silence lived mastery. She could disassemble an M4 carbine blindfolded and rebuild it in under 3 minutes. She could feel when a trigger assembly was 1 ounce too stiff. Her fingers moved over metal with the care of a pianist on ivory keys. Yet no one clapped when she finished. No one noticed. Sarah preferred it that way, or at least, that's what she told herself. The truth was harder to face. When she was 12, her grandfather had placed a weathered rifle in her hands on a Montana morning colder than forgiveness. "The weapon doesn't lie," he'd said, standing behind her as she steadied the barrel toward a tin can 300 yards away. "People will, but not this." The first shot missed, the second didn't. Her grandfather, a Vietnam veteran with hands like oak bark, had smiled faintly and said, "You've got a stillness most people don't. Don't let the world talk you out of it." That stillness had defined her. It was her armor, her anchor, and her prison. She had enlisted at 18 with dreams of becoming a sniper. Her test scores had been near perfect, her marksmanship unmatched, but she didn't speak much, didn't argue, didn't boast, and in the military, silence was often mistaken for weakness. By the time training ended, her file said technically exceptional, lacks assertive leadership qualities. They put her in maintenance. 8 years later, she was still here, 26 years old, with grease on her hands and precision in her blood. She told herself it didn't matter, that what she did was important, that making sure every soldier had a flawless weapon was its own kind of service. And maybe it was. But sometimes, when the armory was quiet and she looked out the narrow window at the mountains, she wondered how many perfect shots she'd built for someone else. That morning, the mist hung low over the range outside. Sarah was cleaning a batch of M24 sniper rifles, her movements rhythmic, meditative. The air smelled faintly of solvent and gunpowder residue. Then came the voices. Loud, confident, echoing through the corridor. "Another perfect score at 800 yards, said Sergeant Jake Morrison, his tone soaked with arrogance. "They should start pushing it to 1,000. Give me a challenge for once." Sarah didn't look up. She didn't need to. Everyone on base knew that voice. Morrison was Fort Carson's unofficial shooting legend, tall, magnetic, always laughing loud enough to make sure everyone heard him. His followers trailed behind him like orbiting satellites. "I heard the recruits can't even hit at 300, one of them said, chuckling. "Standards keep dropping." Morrison laughed, a sharp sound that grated against Sarah's concentration. "That's what happens when they let just anyone handle weapons. Some people are born for this. Others should stick to cleaning duty." The words hit harder than she wanted them to. Her fingers froze mid-movement. Her knuckles whitened around the rifle's frame. It wasn't the first time she'd heard remarks like that. Support staff, cleaners, armorers, they were the background noise of military glory, invisible until something broke. Then everyone remembered their names for about 5 minutes. She took a slow breath, trying to let it pass. But something inside her shifted, quietly, like a hairline crack in glass. She set Morrison's rifle down. The same rifle she'd tuned dozens of times before. She knew every inch of it, every grain, every imperfection. It was her work that kept his reputation alive. Every shot he'd taken, every metal pin to his chest, had traveled down a barrel she had personally maintained. And yet, she was the one invisible in the reflection of his scope. Outside the window, the fog began to lift, revealing the shooting range below. Soldiers moved like small figures in a miniature world, setting up targets, adjusting flags. Sarah watched them. Her reflection stared back from the glass, faint and ghost-like. Maybe that's what she'd become, a ghost among weapons. She returned to her bench and continued cleaning, but her thoughts weren't where her hands were. For the first time in years, a thought crept in that she couldn't ignore. What if they saw what I can really do? The idea terrified her as much as it thrilled her. Hours passed. The armory filled with noise, boots chatter, the metallic clatter of rifles being checked out for training. But Sarah barely heard it. Every movement she made felt heavier, deliberate, charged. When she loaded Morrison's M24 into the transport cart, the decision was already forming in her mind. She wasn't just delivering weapons today. She was going to stay. To watch. To see. And maybe, just maybe, to prove something that had been building inside her for 8 long years. By 11 o'clock, the sun had burned through the mist, leaving the range bathed in sharp Colorado light. Dust floated in the air like tiny golden sparks. Sarah rolled the weapons cart across the gravel, her boots crunching softly. She set up near the equipment zone, pretending to check serial numbers while her eyes flicked toward the firing line. Captain Rodriguez, the unit commander, stood giving orders. The elite sniper team, 8 of them, all confident, all loud, listened with their rifles slung casually over their shoulders. Morrison swaggered forward, adjusting his gloves like a prizefighter before a match. When he passed her, he barely nodded. "Thanks for the delivery, Martinez," he said, voice dripping with casual dismissal. He didn't even look her in the eyes. Sarah's gaze followed him to the line. He sat up prone and steady, his team watching like adoring fans. 600 yards to start, Rodriguez called. Then we move to 8. Morrison, show the new guys how it's done. Sarah folded her arms and watched. The first shot cracked across the field, a sharp echo swallowed by distance. A ping followed, near center. Applause, laughter, backslaps. 9 out of 10. Respectable, predictable. Sarah's trained eyes caught what the others missed. The tremor in his left hand, the micro-shift in his grip. He was compensating for something, and it would cost him at distance. The next shots were the same, 9-10, 9-10, 9. But no perfect 10s, not with a rifle she knew was capable of surgical precision. When the team moved to 800 yards, the truth showed itself. Morrison's shots started to wander. 7, 8, miss. "The scope's off," he muttered loud enough for everyone to hear. "Calibration's bad." Something inside Sarah snapped like a wire under tension. She stepped forward before she could stop herself. "The scope is fine, Sergeant." Silence fell over the range, heads turned. Morrison blinked. "Excuse me." Her voice was calm. "I calibrated it myself this morning. The issue isn't the rifle." Snickers rippled through the group. One of the men muttered, "Stay in your lane, cleaner." Sarah didn't move. Her heart pounded, but her eyes were steady. "With respect, sir," she said, "I've maintained that rifle for 2 years. At 800 yards, it groups within 2 inches. The limitation isn't mechanical." Morrison's face flushed red. "Is that so?" His tone was mocking. "You think you can do better?" Sarah held his stare. "Yes." A quiet murmur ran through the group. Someone whispered, "No way she just said that." Morrison laughed, short and sharp. The weapons tech thinks she can outshoot trained snipers. Cute. Captain Rodriguez raised a hand. Enough. Specialist Martinez, you're qualified on the M24 system. Yes, sir. And your best recorded score. Perfect 10 at 1,000 yards, sir. Another silence, then a scoff from Morrison. Paper targets don't count. Anyone can get lucky once. Sarah's tone didn't change. Then let's test it. Same rifle, same conditions, one shot each. The captain studied her. And if you lose, I'll apologize publicly. And if you win? Her eyes flicked toward Morrison. He acknowledges that maintenance specialists deserve the same respect as combat personnel. The challenge landed like a round in the dirt. Everyone froze, waiting for Morrison's response. He grinned, but it didn't reach his eyes. You've got yourself a deal. Captain Rodriguez stepped aside. Firing line's yours, specialist. Sarah moved forward. Her boots felt heavy, but her hands were calm. The rifle, his rifle, rested on the bipod in the dirt. She lay down behind it, exhaled, and felt the old rhythm return, the one her grandfather had taught her, the pause between breaths where the world stood still. Her cheek pressed to the stock, her eye found the crosshairs. The range blurred into silence. No laughter, no arrogance, no noise. Just the hum of wind and the cold, patient heartbeat inside her chest. Through the scope, the target waited, 800 yards of truth away. Her fingers settled on the trigger. And for a moment, she wasn't in Colorado. She was 12 again, on a Montana hilltop, hearing her grandfather's voice whisper behind her ear. The weapon doesn't lie. The shot cracked through the air, sharp and final. Then came the sound, the unmistakable metallic ping of a bullet hitting dead center. The range went silent. Rodriguez raised the radio. Spotting team confirm. Perfect 10, came the reply. Dead center impact. Sarah lifted her head slowly, the echo still ringing in her ears. No one spoke. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Morrison's smirk was gone. She stood, dusted her knees, and engaged the safety. Your turn, Sergeant. What happens when silence proves itself louder than pride? For a few seconds, nobody moved. The only sound on the range was the faint hum of the spotting team's radio and the distant echo of Sarah's bullet finding its mark. Morrison stood frozen, the rifle still warm from her hands resting on the table between them. His mouth opened, but no words came. Around him, the elite marksman unit, his unit, looked uncertain. Their easy confidence had evaporated into a kind of stunned respect, or was it disbelief? Captain Rodriguez was the first to break the silence. Confirmed impact, he repeated, as if the world needed reminding. His gaze shifted from Sarah to Morrison. Sergeant. Morrison's jaw clenched. I'd like to take my shot now. He snatched the rifle from her hands, the same weapon, the same scope, the same windless morning. Only one thing had changed, the air itself. He lay down, set the bipod, and aimed, but something had shifted behind his eyes. Where Sarah had moved like water, calm, fluid, certain, Morrison moved like a man being watched. Because he was. The crowd leaned forward. The woman from the armory, the quiet one who rarely spoke above a whisper, had just outshot their best man. Now everyone wanted to see if he could reclaim his crown. The rifle cracked again. No ping. No echo. Miss, the radio confirmed after a moment. High and left. Morrison's expression faltered. He chambered another round, quick and careless, breathing too fast. The next shot hit the edge of the target. Score 6, came the voice. Morrison rose to his knees, fury and embarrassment warring in his eyes. The light's different now, he snapped. She got lucky. Let me take another. Rodriguez shook his head. One shot each, that was the agreement. Sarah said nothing. She didn't need to. The murmurs began, low, respectful, unsure. Some of the younger soldiers looked at her like they'd never seen her before. Maybe they hadn't. For 8 years she'd lived in the background, but today she was undeniable. Morrison turned to her, still holding the rifle. That doesn't prove anything. Anyone can get lucky once. Sarah met his eyes, calm, steady. Then let's remove luck from the equation. His brow furrowed, meaning. Let's push it farther, she said quietly. 1,000 yards. The crowd reacted instantly. A murmur of disbelief swept through them. 1,000 yards, the extreme end of qualification range. A test most snipers never attempted outside advanced programs. At that distance, the target was barely visible, smaller than a fingernail through the scope. Morrison's smirk twitched back, desperate and brittle. You're serious. Same terms, Sarah said, her tone level. 1 shot each. I miss, I apologize. You miss, and you acknowledge what you've been refusing to see. Captain Rodriguez stepped forward. You understand what you're asking, Specialist Martinez. This isn't standard procedure. I understand, sir, she said, and I accept the risk. For a long moment the captain studied her, this quiet woman who had spent years hidden in the mechanics of other people's success, and then nodded once. Very well, 1,000 yards. The crew began resetting the range. Soldiers gathered from every direction, drawn by the rumor spreading across the base like wildfire. A weapons tech was challenging the snipers. By the time the new target was up, the crowd had doubled. The air hummed with anticipation. Sarah stood off to the side, quietly checking Morrison's rifle. Every screw, every bolt, every piece of glass. She ran her fingers over the adjustments, her expression unreadable. She wasn't doing it for show. She was doing it because it was her ritual, the way she calmed the noise inside. Around her, the whispers kept rising. Who does she think she is? She's just a technician. Still can't believe she hit that last shot. Sarah heard them, but they barely registered. She'd heard worse before, only this time it didn't hurt. Not anymore. She thought of her grandfather again. The weapon doesn't lie. Captain Rodriguez's voice broke through her thoughts. Range is hot. 1,000-yard target confirmed. You're up, specialist. Sarah stepped forward. Her boots sank slightly into the dirt as she knelt down, the rifle settling into her shoulder. The air felt thinner out here, not from altitude, but from the pressure. 50 soldiers stood behind her, silent. She didn't look back. The scope filled her world again, a small circle of truth. At that distance, the target looked like a shadow of a thought, a faint gray shape framed by the far-off Colorado ridgeline. She slowed her breathing. The wind was barely a whisper, but she could feel its story in the mirage rippling above the ground. A slight updraft, a soft rightward drift. Tiny details invisible to the naked eye, but not to her. Her finger touched the trigger guard, not yet. She inhaled once, exhaled twice, waited for that perfect silence between heartbeats. When she finally fired, the sound was softer than expected, like the air itself respected the moment. 2 seconds passed, 2 long seconds that stretched into eternity. Then across the field came a faint metallic ring, the sound of truth arriving. The radio cracked, impact confirmed, dead center, perfect 10. The crowd erupted. Some cheered, some simply stared. Even Rodriguez, usually composed, let out a quiet whistle. Sarah exhaled and lifted her head. For the first time, she allowed herself a small smile, not of triumph, but of peace. Morrison stepped forward, his face pale. He looked at her, then the target, then back again. His jaw worked soundlessly before he finally managed. You hit it. The spotter lifted the paddle again. Bright red, center mark. Sarah handed him the rifle without a word. Now it was his turn. He moved stiffly to the line. The pressure in the air was almost physical now. He lay down, shoulders rigid, movements sharp and uneven. He didn't check the wind, didn't pause, didn't breathe. He fired, The echo rolled out hollow, uncertain. No ping followed. The radio spoke again. No impact, missed high left. Morrison froze. His rifle lowered slowly, like he'd forgotten how to hold it. Around him, the silence was deafening. Captain Rodriguez walked up, expression unreadable. Specialist Martinez, perfect score at 1,000 yards. Sergeant Morrison, no impact. Challenge complete. Sarah stood at attention, her pulse steady, her voice calm. Permission to clear weapons, sir. Granted. She engaged the safety, handed the rifle to the nearest range officer, and turned toward the captain. Rodriguez nodded. That was one of the finest displays of marksmanship I've seen on this base. Sarah didn't smile. Thank you, sir. Behind her, Morrison was still kneeling, his face tight with humiliation. Every soldier on that range knew what had just happened, not just a perfect shot, but a quiet rebellion against the unspoken hierarchy that decided who mattered and who didn't. Rodriguez turned to him. Sergeant, you had an agreement to honor. Morrison's throat worked before the words came out, heavy as gravel. Specialist Martinez, he said stiffly, your technical expertise is impressive. It wasn't an apology, not really, but it was the first honest respect he'd ever shown her. Sarah simply nodded, thank you, Sergeant. And then she turned away. For the rest of that day, the story rippled through Fort Carson like a shockwave. Soldiers whispered it in hallways, repeated it in the mess hall, exaggerated it by evening. The quiet woman from the armory had beaten the best. Some called it luck. Some called it impossible. But those who'd been there knew the truth. By nightfall, Sarah was back in the armory, cleaning the same rifles under the same flickering lights. The hum of the fluorescent bulb filled the silence. Yet everything was different now. Her hands moved through familiar motions, but her thoughts had changed shape. That perfect shot, it wasn't about proving herself anymore. It was about remembering who she'd been before she let the world tell her who she was allowed to be. She stared down at the rifle parts spread across her bench. 8 years of invisible service. 8 years of staying quiet, staying safe, staying unseen. But something had changed forever out there in the sunlight. Somewhere deep inside, the quiet woman who'd spent her life tuning weapons had taken a breath and decided not to hide again. The next morning, the whispers followed her. When she walked into the mess hall, conversations paused. Some eyes held respect, others resentment. Morrison's supporters glared. A few nodded silently, as if apologizing on their unit's behalf. Sarah ignored them all. She sat alone, same as always, but for the first time she didn't feel alone. Halfway through her meal, Captain Rodriguez approached her table. Specialist Martinez. She stood quickly, sir. He gestured for her to sit. You've caused quite a stir, you know. I didn't intend to, sir, she said quietly. He smiled faintly. No one ever does, but talent tends to create ripples, and what you showed out there, he paused, considering his words. It's more than talent, it's discipline, composure. You've got something that can't be taught. Sarah met his eyes. With respect, sir, I just did my job. Rodriguez leaned back. That's the point. You've been doing more than your job for years, and it's time someone noticed. He handed her a sealed envelope. Report to my office at 900 tomorrow. We need to discuss your future assignments. Then he left her there, surrounded by silence again, but a different kind this time. Not loneliness, anticipation. Sarah looked at the envelope. The seal gleamed faintly under the cafeteria lights. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel invisible. She felt seen. And that terrified her more than any target ever could. That night she couldn't sleep. The base outside was quiet, the wind low, the moonlight spilling across the rifles lined neatly in her quarters. Each one a story she'd helped tell. She thought about the shot, about the sound of the bullet connecting after those eternal 2 seconds of flight, about the silence that followed, not of disbelief, but of awakening. Some people seek recognition, others seek truth. Sarah had found both, and neither felt the way she'd imagined. Because now came the harder part, what to do with it. Tomorrow would bring questions, offers, maybe even resentment. But tonight all she wanted was silence, the honest kind, the kind that didn't hide her anymore. She reached for her grandfather's old rifle, the one she kept locked beneath her bed. She laid it across her knees and traced her fingers along the barrel, worn smooth from years of use. The same words whispered in her memory again. The weapon doesn't lie. She looked out the window at the distant range, faintly visible in the moonlight. No, she thought. Neither do I. What happens when respect arrives too late? 3 days had passed since the shot that changed everything, and the echoes of it still hung in the air around Fort Carson. Wherever Sarah walked now, silence followed. It wasn't the comfortable kind she had once loved. This silence carried weight, of curiosity, of jealousy, of pride bruised and rearranged. When she entered the mess hall, soldiers, conversation softened into half-sentences. Some looked up and nodded, the way one might acknowledge a superior officer. Others averted their eyes. A few simply stared, trying to understand how the quiet woman from the armory had humiliated their top marksman at 1,000 yards. She ate quickly and left. The attention pressed on her skin like static. She wanted to retreat to the armory, the only place that had ever felt like hers. But when she opened the heavy steel door, her stomach tightened. The smell hit first. Gun oil spilled across the floor, tools scattered like shrapnel. Her workbench, once immaculate, was chaos, and pinned to the wall with a cleaning brush was a note written in black marker. Stay in your lane, weapons cleaner. For a long moment she just stood there. The hum of the overhead lights buzzed faintly, the same as always, but the armory felt different now, violated, angry. Sarah knelt and began to clean. No complaint, no report, just methodical motion. She knew how things broke and how to fix them. It didn't matter if it was a rifle or a room or her own heart. Still her hand shook once, only once. By nightfall the armory looked whole again, though something inside her did not. She locked the door, double-checked every latch and walked out into the cold Colorado air. The next morning, Captain Rodriguez summoned her. His office smelled of coffee and gunmetal polish, sunlight filtering through half-closed blinds. "Specialist Martinez," he said, gesturing for her to sit. "I've been receiving inquiries about you." "Inquiries, sir?" He opened a folder thick with correspondence. "Advanced Marksmanship Unit wants an evaluation. Special Operations Command has asked for your record. Even a civilian defense contractor's made an unofficial approach." Sarah blinked, all because of one demonstration. "Because of what that demonstration revealed," Rodriguez said. "Talent that shouldn't be sitting behind a workbench." She hesitated. "Sir, I'm not sure." He raised a hand. "Listen, you've proven you can shoot, but this is more than that. These programs need soldiers who can think, adapt, stay calm under pressure. You've shown all of that." He paused, watching her expression. "But you also stirred up resentment in Morrison's unit. Some of his men feel their credibility been damaged. That needs managing." Her jaw tightened. "With respect, sir, I didn't provoke the challenge. I defended my work." "I know." Rodriguez leaned forward, his tone softening. "You handled yourself with professionalism, but politics exist everywhere, even in the field. What happens next depends on how you navigate them." Sarah looked down at her hands, still faintly stained with oil, the same hands that had held 1,000 rifles for others. "What are my options?" "You can stay here in maintenance, but after what happened I doubt you'll be left in peace. Or you can accept evaluation for the Advanced Marksmanship Unit. 6 months of grueling training at Fort Benning. If you pass, sniper qualification. Leadership tracks open. Real missions." "And if I fail?" Then you come back here, no harm done, but I don't think you will. Sarah nodded slowly, the decision already forming, heavy but certain. I'll think about it, sir. Do that, Rodriguez said. You've earned the right to choose what comes next. That night her quarters felt smaller than ever. The cot creaked when she sat down. Across the room, her grandfather's rifle leaned against the wall, wood worn smooth by years of practice. She stared at it for a long time. 8 years of invisible service. 8 years of silence mistaken for weakness. Now the door was open, but walking through it meant leaving the one place that had always felt safe. A knock interrupted her thoughts. Come in. Corporal Janet Williams stepped inside, carrying 2 mugs of coffee. Figured you could use this. Sarah smiled faintly. Thanks. Williams sat, glancing around. I heard about the mess in the armory. You didn't report it. No need, Sarah said. It's clean now. Williams studied her. You know, when you took that shot, you didn't just prove something to Morrison. You proved something to a lot of us. Sarah looked up. What do you mean? I joined communications because my aptitude test said technical. I wanted to be a pilot, but I let the system tell me who I was. Williams shook her head. Watching you out there made me wonder how many of us are hiding behind our assignments. Sarah thought of the young soldiers who had laughed at her challenge, of the ones who now looked at her differently. Maybe it's not about hiding, she said quietly. Maybe it's about waiting for the right reason to stop. William smiled. Well, you found yours. When the corporal left, the room fell silent again. Sarah stared at the rifle across from her until her reflection blurred in the polished wood. She realized that tomorrow, she would walk into Rodriguez's office with a decision that would end the life she'd known and begin another. Friday came cold and bright. The mountains gleamed with early snow. Sir, I've made my decision, Sarah said, standing at attention in Rodriguez's office. I'm listening. I'll accept the evaluation at Fort Benning. Rodriguez's expression softened into approval. Good, I hoped you would. You report Monday morning. You'll have the weekend to prepare. She nodded, trying to absorb the reality. And my current duties. Master Sergeant Hayes will distribute them among the staff until a replacement is appointed. If Benning doesn't work out, your position remains open. She appreciated the safety net, even though she never intended to use it. The captain rose and extended his hand. Congratulations, specialist. You've earned this. The weekend passed in a blur of preparation and reflection. She organized her workspace one last time, leaving detailed notes for whoever followed, every tool in place, every log updated, her way of saying goodbye. Saturday evening, another knock came. She opened the door to find Sergeant Morrison standing there. Martinez, he said awkwardly. Sergeant. He hesitated, shifting his weight. Mind if I come in? She stepped aside. He remained standing, hat in hand, eyes on the floor. Look, what you did on the range was impressive, more than impressive. I've been thinking about it. Sarah waited. I built a career on being the best shot on base. Then you came along and shattered that illusion in one morning. He met her eyes finally. I deserved the embarrassment. I was arrogant. I treated you and others like you didn't matter. Apology accepted, she said softly. Morrison nodded, relief flickering across his face. I heard you're going to Benning. The instructors there are tough. They'll push you past your limits, but you've got what it takes. Thank you, Sergeant. He started toward the door, then stopped. You taught me something I should have known long ago. Respect isn't earned by volume. It's earned by consistency. He smiled faintly. Make that shot count wherever it takes you. After he left, Sarah stood motionless for a while, feeling the strange calm that follows closure. Monday morning, 500 hours. The base was still half asleep when she boarded the transport truck with a single duffel bag and her personal weapon case. As the vehicle pulled away, she looked back once. The mountains framed the horizon like an old photograph. Fort Carson grew smaller, then vanished behind a ridge. 8 years ago, she had arrived here as a quiet recruit with more precision than confidence. She was leaving as something else entirely. Fort Benning hit her like a different planet. The air was heavier, the humidity clinging to her uniform. The training complex sprawled across acres of meticulously arranged ranges, some stretching beyond 1,200 yards, others buried deep in forest for concealment drills. When the transport stopped, a voice barked through the early fog. Candidates dismount, line up on the white markers. 12 soldiers stood shoulder to shoulder, 11 men and her. The instructor introduced himself, Master Sergeant Thomas Chen. His gaze was sharp, assessing. This is the Advanced Marksmanship Evaluation Program. 6 months. Half of you won't finish. Your previous assignments mean nothing here. Only your performance does. He paced slowly down the line, stopping briefly in front of Sarah. Weapons maintenance, huh? Let's see if those clean hands can stay steady under pressure. Yes, Master Sergeant. Good, you'll need that composure. The first week was an assault on every comfort she'd known. Physical conditioning at dawn, range work until dusk, every error magnified, every hesitation punished. But Sarah adapted. The long hours didn't intimidate her. Precision was her language, and for every mile run, every drill endured, she told herself the same quiet truth: you belong here. What she hadn't expected was how different combat training felt from solitary work. Team exercises required communication, coordination, leadership, skills she'd spent her life avoiding. On the third week, her team failed a navigation exercise because she'd focused on technical accuracy instead of group coordination. When the after-action report came, it was blunt. Martinez, excellent shot placement, poor team integration, needs command presence. That night, Master Sergeant Chen found her cleaning her rifle under a flickering light. Martinez, he said, you're the best technical shooter I've seen in years, but leadership isn't about perfect shots, it's about making others better. I understand, sir, she said quietly. Do you? Because if you don't learn it, you'll top out as an excellent marksman who never leads, and that would be a waste. He walked away, leaving her alone with her reflection in the rifle's polished steel. She thought about her grandfather again. The weapon doesn't lie, but people did, including herself. She'd spent years pretending solitude was enough. Maybe it wasn't anymore. Weeks blurred into months. Sarah learned to speak when instinct told her to stay silent, to command when doubt whispered to yield. She discovered that leadership wasn't noise, it was clarity. That stillness wasn't the absence of courage, it was its foundation. Her hands remained steady, but now they guided others, not just machines. And every night, as she disassembled her weapon under dim barracks light, she felt the quiet satisfaction of someone who was finally building more than rifles. She was rebuilding herself. How far can silence carry someone before it's tested by chaos? The forest was still, the kind of stillness that presses into your chest and dares you to breathe wrong. The candidates had been inserted before dawn, their orders simple on paper: infiltrate, locate, extract. In practice, it meant endurance, fatigue, the kind of exhaustion that stripped away pride and left only instinct. Sarah crouched behind a fallen pine, scanning the tree line through her scope. Sweat dripped from her temple despite the cold. Her heart beat steady. Beside her, Private Rourke whispered, 2 targets, northwest ridge, movements sporadic. She nodded once, hold position. Master Sergeant Chen's voice came faintly through the comm, blue team status. Sarah clicked her mic. In position, visual on hostiles, awaiting wind correction. Copy your call, Martinez. Her call, the word still felt foreign. For months she'd trained to trust others, to speak when silence no longer served. Now she had to prove it mattered. She measured the distance, 600 yards, maybe more, light wind from the east. The targets were training dummies rigged with heat sensors, but it didn't matter. The test wasn't the shot. It was the leadership behind it. "Rourke," she whispered. "Shift 5 degrees left, take over watch. Diaz, you're flanking right, no movement until my mark." Rourke hesitated. "Ma'am," Chen said, "time's limited if we wait." "We wait," she said firmly. "Patience is faster than panic." He fell silent. The next 2 minutes stretched like wire. Every rustle, every breath of wind seemed amplified. Then, through the scope, the dummy's heat signatures flared red, movement simulation. "Mark," she said softly. 2 muffled cracks. The forest swallowed the sound, targets down. She exhaled slowly. "Advance." Her team emerged from cover, moving low and deliberate. For the first time they flowed together, quiet, precise, efficient. By the time they reached the extraction point, Chen was waiting with his arms crossed. "Blue team complete," she reported. He studied her, then glanced at the others. "Results." Rourke stepped forward, hesitating. "We cleared the field, Master Sergeant." Chen's eyes narrowed. "I asked for results, not excuses." Sarah met his gaze. 2 hostiles neutralized. No friendly exposure. Extraction in under 9 minutes. He gave a curt nod. "Efficient, controlled, that's leadership." She blinked. The praise came quietly, without flourish, but it hit harder than any medal. When the rest of the teams returned, muddy and defeated, Chen gathered them in the clearing. "This was a test of composure. Some of you fired before confirming targets. Some froze under pressure. Only one team completed without compromise." He turned toward her. "Martinez." For a moment nobody clapped. Then someone did. Slow, uncertain. The sound spread until it filled the clearing. Sarah didn't smile. She only nodded, the weight of responsibility pressing deeper into her shoulders. Victory here didn't feel like triumph. It felt like permission to keep going. The months that followed hardened them all. Training blurred into endurance. Sleep became a rumor. She stopped counting bruises and started counting lessons. On the 92nd day, they ran live-fire simulations through an abandoned village. Fog clung to the ruins. Every corner was a question, every shadow an answer waiting to explode. Rourke was on point, Diaz covering rear. Sarah moved with her team through the silent street, eyes slicing through the gray. She could hear her breath inside the mask, the faint scrape of boots on wet stone. Then it happened. An explosion ripped through the left building, throwing dust and heat into the air. Rourke went down. Shrapnel peppered the walls. "Rourke," she shouted, crawling through debris. He was alive but bleeding, his leg torn open by a metal fragment. Diaz's voice cracked through comms. "Contact rear, multiple hostiles." Simulated rounds pinged around them, each one a reminder that this wasn't a drill, it was judgment. Sarah dragged Rourke behind cover, adrenaline turning her arms to fire. The mission objective, reach the extraction point, was now irrelevant. No one left behind. She ripped open a field dressing, hands slick with his blood. "Stay with me, soldier," she muttered. He tried to joke. "Guess patience wasn't faster this time." "Shut up and breathe." Her comm buzzed, Chen's voice distant but calm. "Martinez, report." "Casualty. Rourke injured, taking fire, requesting medevac simulation trigger." "Denied, extraction only at Point Charlie, 400 meters southeast, test protocol." Her pulse spiked. They wanted her to move him, bleeding, vulnerable under fire. Part of her wanted to rage at the absurdity, but rules were rules, and this was what leadership meant. She exhaled slowly. "Copy that." "Diaz," she said, "smoke cover, 2 grenades left arc, on my mark." She waited for the moment the gunfire paused, half a heartbeat, and then shouted, "Now." White smoke burst across the alley. She lifted Rourke's weight across her shoulders, legs trembling under his bulk, and pushed through the haze. Diaz fired blind suppression, each round echoing in the fog. They stumbled into open ground, half running, half falling. The simulated rounds hissed past. Rourke's breath grew shallow. Then light, a green flare at the extraction zone. The end. She collapsed beside him, coughing, trembling, alive. Later in debrief, Chen stood silent for a long moment before speaking. "Martinez, you broke protocol." She met his eyes. "Yes, Master Sergeant." "You ignored tactical superiority to prioritize a casualty." "Yes, sir." He leaned closer. "Explain why." Her voice was steady. "Because targets can wait, people can't." Chen's expression didn't change, but his tone softened. "And that is why you passed." The room was silent. Rourke, leg bandaged, gave her a small salute. Diaz grinned faintly through exhaustion. Chen turned to the rest. "You all witnessed it. Leadership isn't about survival, it's about responsibility. She made the hard choice, the right one." Sarah said nothing, but something heavy lifted from her chest, a truth she hadn't realized she'd been holding since Fort Carson. Respect wasn't a medal. It was the quiet trust that others placed in you when everything else fell apart. Graduation day came 6 months later. The Georgia air was thick with summer and gunpowder. The candidates stood in formation, uniforms crisp, boots caked with history. Chen read from the roster, his voice carrying over the field. "Distinguished graduate, Specialist Sarah Martinez." Applause broke out. She stepped forward, accepted the insignia, and saluted. Chen's hand lingered for a moment longer than regulation. "You earned this," he said quietly. "Don't waste it." "I won't, sir." When the ceremony ended, she stood alone at the edge of the range, the insignia heavy in her palm. The forest beyond shimmered in heat, alive with memory. Every sound reminded her of where she'd come from, the clang of a bolt, the echo of that 1,000-yard shot, her grandfather's voice telling her that the weapon never lies. Now she understood something deeper. Neither does silence. That night in her small quarters, she packed for reassignment. Her orders waited on the desk: Joint Task Group, Eastern Theater, real missions, real consequences. She paused to look at her reflection in the window, the same face, the same eyes, but a different kind of quiet now, earned, not endured. Her phone buzzed, a message from Captain Rodriguez. "Proud of you, Martinez. Remember, sometimes command isn't loud, it's steady. Safe travels." She smiled faintly, thumb hovering over the glass before typing back. "Copy that, sir, and thank you for hearing me before anyone else did." She powered the phone down, placed it neatly beside her weapon, and lay back on the cot. Outside, the rain began again, soft and rhythmic. Tomorrow the field, tomorrow new orders, tomorrow the world beyond training. For now, she let herself drift into sleep, the echo of that truth whispering through her dreams. Sometimes the loudest voice on the battlefield belongs to the one who says nothing at all. How much of a person must die before they become what the uniform demands? 2 years later, Sarah was no longer the quiet armorer from Fort Carson. The name Martinez carried weight now, spoken in operations rooms and whispered in debrief tents. Her reputation had outgrown her hesitation, and that was the part that scared her most. The mission briefing was short, the air inside the tent heavy with diesel and tension. They were in Eastern Europe, somewhere unmarked on maps civilians would ever see. A border skirmish had escalated, and a small reconnaissance unit had gone dark inside hostile territory. The satellite feed caught only fragments, heat signatures, sudden stillness, nothing since. Their orders were clear: extract or confirm. She sat across from Lieutenant Rourke, no longer private but the same stubborn grin beneath new scars. "Feels like déjà vu," he murmured, adjusting his scope. "Only this time it's not training." Sarah's reply was quiet. No second chances this time either. The team, 5 operators, lean and wired with fatigue, checked their gear in silence. Outside, the sky bruised toward night. Wind swept through the grass, whispering over the hilltops. She always noticed the wind first. It was the same language spoken everywhere she went. "Wheels up in 5, said the flight crew chief. "Weather's turning." It always was. The helicopter cut through the dusk like a blade. No lights, no chatter, only the deep thrum of the rotors and the pulse of anticipation beneath the noise. Sarah stared at the terrain below, dark forests, fractured rivers, distant flashes of lightning tracing veins through the clouds. Every mission felt like this before it began, suspended between certainty and oblivion. 2 minutes, the crew chief called. She adjusted her rifle, checked the safety, then the scope. Habit, ritual, control in chaos. Rourke leaned closer, shouting over the engine, "You ever get used to this part?" She shook her head. "You shouldn't." The landing was rough, mud, wind, and darkness swallowing them whole. They disembarked fast, crouching low, the helicopter vanishing into the storm's mouth. And then there was only rain, cold and relentless. Sarah's comm crackled softly. "Team 1, radio check." "Lima Charlie," she replied. Her voice sounded steadier than she felt. They moved uphill, single file, boots sinking into wet soil. Every tree felt like it was watching. The forest carried a different kind of silence, the heavy, breathing kind that remembers violence. 15 minutes in, Diaz whispered, "Thermals picking up faint signatures, 200 meters north." Sarah raised a fist, signaling a halt. Through her scope she saw flickers of movement, 3 heat shapes, unmoving, low to the ground. Not alive. They advanced slowly. The shapes resolved into what was left of the recon unit, 2 bodies slumped near a burned-out vehicle, one still half in cover. The rain had washed away blood but not truth. Rourke knelt beside one. "No pulse, been here at least 24 hours. Sarah's eyes scanned the perimeter. No sign of struggle nearby. They were ambushed from above. She looked up the ridge. That's when she saw it, fresh drag marks leading uphill, faint but deliberate. Something or someone had been taken. Her stomach turned. "We're not alone." They followed the trail in silence. The path wound upward through thick brush until it opened into a clearing where the world seemed to stop. An enemy outpost, crude but functional, canvas tents, generators, a few guards packing in the gloom. Through the rain she saw what they'd come for. A lone prisoner bound to a pole near the firelight, a hood over their head. "Could be one of ours," Diaz whispered. "Could be bait." Sarah studied the scene through her scope. The guard rotations were sloppy, overconfident. She marked their paths, timed the gaps. 2 minutes between rotations, she said. "We can breach from the west flank, eliminate sentries before they react." Rourke frowned. "Risky, no overwatch." Her eyes met his. "That's why I'll take point." He didn't argue, he just nodded. The rain grew heavier. Thunder crawled across the sky like a warning. They moved anyway. Sarah led them through the brush, every step calculated, her heartbeat sinking to the rhythm of the storm. When they reached the edge of the camp, she counted the guards again. 4 visible, 2 near the fire, 2 by the trucks. She waited for the thunder. When it came, she moved. The first shot cracked through lightning, masked by the sound. The guard fell before he could blink. Diaz and Rourke swept the flank, 2 more down in seconds. The last guard turned, shouting something in a language she didn't understand. Sarah didn't let him finish. Silence returned. "Secure the area," she ordered, voice low. "Check the prisoner." Rourke moved first, knife slicing through the bindings. The hood fell back. It wasn't one of theirs, not military. A civilian researcher, eyes wild with fear. His lips moved soundlessly before words came. They're coming back." Sarah turned toward the forest. The thunder had faded, but the rain carried a new sound now, a dull, rhythmic tremor. "Engines! Positions!" she shouted. Moments later, headlights broke through the trees. Trucks, 3, maybe 4, loaded with armed hostiles barreling toward them. Contact front, Rourke yelled. The night exploded. Gunfire cut through rain and wind. Sarah dove behind a crate, returning fire in controlled bursts. The forest lit up with muzzle flashes. Each movement became instinct: aim, fire, shift. She could feel the earth vibrating beneath her boots, the noise collapsing into pure chaos. Diaz suppress left, she ordered. Rourke, cover the prisoner. Rounds tore through canvas. Splinters of wood burst like shrapnel. A shot grazed her shoulder, spinning her sideways into the mud. She bit down the pain, chambered another round, and kept firing. Through the scope, she caught a glimpse of one of the truck gunners, high-mounted, spraying the camp. She adjusted half a degree and took the shot. The gunner dropped. Another replaced him seconds later. "Too many," Diaz shouted. "We need extraction." Sarah keyed her mic, voice raw. "Command, this is Echo Team. We're compromised. Request immediate evac." Static, then faintly. "Negative, storm grounding all flights. You're on your own." She stared at the radio, then the men around her, exhausted, bleeding, still fighting. She made a decision. "Rourke, take Diaz and the civilian. Move south toward the ridge line. I'll cover." He turned, eyes wide. "The hell you will." "That's an order." The words hit him like a slap. He hesitated, just long enough to see the look in her eyes. Then he nodded once, jaw tight. "Don't you die here, Martinez." She smiled faintly, not planning to. They vanished into the rain. Sarah shifted position, sighting through the chaos. She wasn't trying to win now, just to delay, to mislead, to make them believe there were more of her than one. She fired, moved, fired again. Each shot deliberate, each second bought. Then came the explosion. One of their grenades, maybe a stray round hitting fuel. Fire tore through the camp, orange against black. The blast threw her backward, ears ringing, lungs burning. She crawled behind cover, coughing, vision blurred. The storm raged louder, hiding her breaths. She reloaded, last magazine. Figures emerged through smoke. 5, maybe 6, too many. She steadied her aim, whispering the words she always said before a shot, quiet like a prayer. "The weapon doesn't lie." Her fingers squeezed. One down, another. Then pain, a sudden searing impact along her ribs. She gasped, fell sideways, the mud turning dark beneath her. Her body felt far away, her weapon heavy, slipping from her hands. Through fatting vision, she saw movement on the ridge, Rourke's team, silhouettes escaping into the storm. She smiled, small and tired. "Mission complete." Her radio crackled faintly, Rourke's voice frantic. "Sarah, Sarah, come in." She tried to answer, but only air came out. The last thing she saw was the fire dying under rain, the world dimming into quiet again. When she woke, it wasn't light that greeted her, it was sound. The low hum of machines, the steady beep of a monitor, hospital light, antiseptic air. She turned her head slightly, pain followed. A nurse noticed. "Easy," she said softly, "you're safe now." Safe, the word felt foreign. Later Rourke arrived, uniform torn, eyes red. "You should have died out there," he said quietly. She managed a faint smile. "I thought I did." "You bought us 20 minutes, enough to reach extraction point before they circled back. Command, calling it a miracle." Sarah looked at him. It wasn't a miracle, it was math, time traded for time. He swallowed hard. "You traded yourself." She looked away. Someone had to. He stayed for hours, saying little. Sometimes silence was all that was left between soldiers who'd seen too much. When he finally left, she lay back, staring at the ceiling tiles. The rhythm of the monitors became the rhythm of memory, steady, unrelenting. Somewhere deep inside, she realized what had changed. She had always defined herself by precision, by control, but war had no patience for perfection. It demanded presence, sacrifice, humanity. Weeks passed. Recovery blurred into routine. Then one morning, Captain Rodriguez appeared in the doorway, older now, gray at the edges, the same calm gravity in his stance. "Specialist," he said quietly, stepping closer. "You made the reports." She tried to sit up. "Sir." "At ease." He pulled up a chair. "You saved 3 lives, that's not nothing." She met his eyes. "It doesn't feel like enough." He studied her for a moment. "It never does." Silence lingered between them, familiar, honest. Then he said, "Command, recommending you for the Cross of Valor, and reassignment, stateside, instructional division." Sarah blinked. "Training." "New recruits, advanced marksmanship. They need someone who understands what it costs." She hesitated. "I'm not sure I can teach that." Rodriguez smiled faintly. "That's exactly why you can." He stood, leaving her with a file. "Rest, Martinez. You've earned the right to stop fighting, at least for a while." That night she sat by the hospital window, staring at the city lights blinking like distant fires. Her reflection looked older, sharper, but her eyes were the same. She reached for the small charm she kept around her neck, a single bullet casing, polished smooth, the same one from her 1,000-yard shot. She turned it in her fingers and whispered to the night. "Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts." And for the first time in years, she allowed herself to close her eyes, not in exhaustion but in peace. What happens when the one who used to follow orders is now the one giving them? It had been 8 months since Sarah Martinez left the battlefield behind. The uniform still fit, the scars had mostly faded, but the quiet was different now, less a refuge, more a weight. Teaching was supposed to be easier. It was. Fort Bragg's firing range stretched under a punishing sun, the air thick with the smell of gunpowder and dust. Recruits lined up along the berm, rifles slung, their faces a mix of boredom and nerves. Most were barely out of high school. None of them had seen what the weapon could truly do. Sarah walked behind them slowly, her boots crunching gravel. "Safety off doesn't mean ready," she said evenly. "Ready means steady. Breath low, control high. Rifle's an extension of thought, not ego." A few nodded without understanding. One, Private Hensley, rolled his eyes. She stopped behind him. "Problem, Private." He shrugged. "Just saying, ma'am, I've been hunting since I was 9. Don't think a classroom can teach instinct." Sarah leaned in slightly, her tone calm but sharp. "Instinct without discipline is noise. Out there, noise gets people killed." He looked away. She didn't press. Time would. Across the line, another recruit flinched at the recoil, sending a round wide. Sarah knelt beside her, adjusting her stance gently. "Don't fight it. Let it move through you. Control comes from flow, not force." The girl nodded, steadied her aim, and the next shot rang clean. Sarah gave a small nod. Progress. When the drill ended, she called them in. "Remember, anyone can pull a trigger. Very few understand when not to." The recruits dispersed, muttering. Sarah stood alone, watching heat shimmer above the barrels stacked in sunlight. The echo of each shot hung in her chest longer than it should have. That night in her office, she sat staring at the training reports. Numbers, scores, ranks. None of them told the truth she wanted to teach, the one that could save them later. Because no one ever wrote on paper what it felt like to drag a bleeding friend through the mud, while the sky screamed around you. No one graded the silence after. A week later, she met the new class, fresh faces again, all eager confidence. Among them was a name that pulled her eyes to the roster, Cadet Arya Nguyen. It took Sarah a moment to place it. The niece of Lieutenant General Bao Nguyen, high expectations, high profile. Sarah felt the familiar tension rise. Politics never stayed out of classrooms for long. During the first exercise, Arya missed every long-distance target by inches, too quick on the trigger, too rigid in her breath. But she never complained, never flinched. Every miss made her quieter. Sarah recognized that kind of quiet. After class, she found Arya still at the range, alone. The sun had dropped, painting the sky in iron and fire. Sarah watched for a moment before speaking. "You're chasing the shot." Arya lowered the rifle. Permission to speak freely, ma'am. Always. I'm used to being good at things, the young woman said, frustration flickering in her tone. This doesn't make sense. I'm doing everything by the book. Sarah nodded. That's the problem. The book doesn't breathe, you do. Arya frowned. So what should I do? Stop trying to impress the scope, Sarah said softly. Learn to listen instead. Listen to what? The silence between heartbeats. It sounded strange even to her own ears, but Arya's eyes widened with something between confusion and belief. Yes, ma'am. The next day, Arya's shot was clean. Weeks passed and word spread across the base about Martinez's methods. The quiet instructor, some called her. The ghost, others whispered. She never raised her voice, yet somehow her presence filled every space she entered. Her recruits started hitting impossible targets, but more than that, they started thinking, moving with purpose, acting less like soldiers chasing scores and more like people aware of consequence. Rourke visited once, bringing coffee and news. Heard the brass is impressed, he said. They're saying you're turning shooters into leaders. Sarah smirked faintly. I'm just teaching them to see. He studied her face for a moment. And you still seeing? She hesitated. Enough. He nodded, but his eyes lingered on the shadows under hers. You ever gonna tell them about what happened? No, she said simply. They don't need my ghosts. They'll earn their own. He didn't argue. He just left the coffee and patted her shoulder before walking out into the evening. By winter, the base had grown colder, the air brittle with frost. Sarah kept training sessions running even when wind cut across the field like knives. The recruits didn't complain anymore. They moved like soldiers who had learned to find calm in discomfort. Then came the accident. A live-fire drill, routine controlled until it was. Private Hensley, overconfident as ever, ignored safety protocol, stepped out of formation mid-reload and caught a fragment from a ricochet. He went down hard, blood and snow. Sarah was at his side in seconds. Pressure here, she ordered, voice sharp now. Daya's now an assistant instructor moved fast, compressing the wound. Stay with me, Hensley, she said, voice breaking its calm for the first time. He blinked, gasping, didn't see it coming. She squeezed his hand. You weren't supposed to. They stabilized him before medics arrived. He lived, but barely. And afterward, when the range fell silent, the recruits looked at her differently, not as a teacher, as someone who carried something they couldn't yet name. Later that night, Sarah sat alone in the armory, her sanctuary again, though it felt haunted by echoes of who she'd been. She cleaned Hensley's weapon herself, each stroke deliberate, almost ceremonial. Captain Rodriguez called from Washington. His voice was softer now, tired. I read the incident report. You did everything right. I should have seen it, she said quietly. I always see it. You're not God, Martinez. No, sir, just the one who's supposed to notice. There was a pause. How's he doing? He'll walk again, she said. Maybe. Rodriguez sighed. And you? Sarah looked at the rifle pieces laid out before her, precision and fragility side by side. Still learning when not to pull the trigger. Weeks passed. Hensley returned on crutches to visit the range. The class froze when they saw him. Sarah stepped forward, saying nothing, just nodding him toward the firing line. He limped up, picked up his rifle, and fired. Perfect shot. The recruits erupted into quiet applause, small but sincere. Sarah stood back, a faint smile flickering before fading into reflection. Later, Arya approached her. Ma'am, she said, voice soft, I think I understand what you meant about the silence. Sarah tilted her head. What did you hear? Arya hesitated. That sometimes silence isn't peace, it's responsibility. Sarah's eyes softened. Exactly. The young woman smiled, almost shy. Then I'll carry it carefully. Sarah nodded. Do that. The world will try to take it from you. When Arya walked away, Sarah turned back to the field. The wind had picked up again, brushing through the flag at half-mast, scattering dust and snow across the ground. She closed her eyes and breathed in the cold, the sound of rifles in the distance fading into heartbeat rhythm. For the first time since the war, the silence didn't feel heavy. It felt earned. How do you return to the fire after you've taught others to fear it? The recall order came without warning, a single encrypted message on her terminal. Operational redeployment, immediate. The date, the coordinates, the clearance, all stamped with urgency. She stared at the screen for a long time before whispering to herself, not again. 8 months of training others. 8 months of believing she'd earned the right to stay in peace. But war had a way of finding the people who understood it too well. When she reported to command, Rodriguez was already there. He looked older, the lines deeper around his eyes. "You're being attached as an advisor," he said. "Joint Task Group is deploying east. Reconstruction zone turned hostile overnight. They need someone who can think under pressure." "Why me?" she asked quietly. "Because your students are there," he said, "and they asked for you." The words hit harder than gunfire. "Who?" "Nguyen's unit, your cadet." Sarah froze. Arya Nguyen, the sharp, determined recruit who had learned to listen to silence, was now a second lieutenant leading her own team overseas. "She's capable," Rodriguez added, "but she's green. They're walking into the same storm you once did." Sarah's voice softened. "Then I'll go." The plane cut through endless gray skis, the engines humming like ghosts of old missions. Sarah sat alone, helmet resting on her knees. Through the small window, the world looked distant, unreal. She tried not to think about the last time she'd flown east, how the rain had looked against the helicopter glass, how her ribs had burned when she fell. She still woke to that night sometimes. The landing zone was chaos, smoke curling from hillsides, sand mixing with diesel and heat. The base was temporary, metal walls, tents, and exhaustion everywhere. She stepped down from the transport, boots sinking into dust that felt too familiar. A young officer approached, saluting sharply. "Ma'am, welcome to Falcon Outpost." "Where Nguyen?" she asked. "Forward observation base, 30 clicks north. She's been holding position since the skirmishes started last week." "Casualties?" The officer hesitated. 6 dead, 3 missing. Sarah's stomach clenched. "Get me a transport." By the time she reached the forward base, night had swallowed the horizon. Arya met her outside the perimeter, helmet under one arm, face streaked with grime but eyes clear. "Ma'am," she said, voice steady but cracked with fatigue. "Didn't think you'd come." Sarah looked at her, this young soldier who once couldn't hit a target, and felt a rush of pride and fear all at once. "Didn't think you'd need me." Arya smiled faintly. "I didn't until now." They walked together through the camp, makeshift trenches, flickering lamps, soldiers cleaning weapons that looked too heavy for their hands. Sarah recognized the expression on their faces, the edge between control and collapse. Inside the command tent, Arya spread a map across the table. "They hit us from the North Ridge 3 nights ago. Drones caught partial movement before losing signal. Whoever they are, they know terrain better than we do. Every approach, every ambush line, they're ahead of us." Sarah studied the map. "And your comms?" "Intermittent. They're jamming short range." Sarah tapped the ridge on the map. "You're reacting, not anticipating. That's their advantage." Arya frowned. "So we stop waiting." Sarah nodded. "We hunt." The next night, under a moon drowned by haze, the small unit moved through the valley, Sarah beside Arya, the air thick with the smell of cordite and dust. Each step crunched overspent shell casings and broken rock. The younger soldiers whispered too much, shifted too often. Sarah's hand lifted once. They froze. She pointed toward a narrow ravine where the darkness seemed heavier. "They're watching us," she murmured. "How can you tell?" Arya whispered. Sarah tilted her head. The silence changed. A faint metallic click broke through the stillness, too deliberate. Down, she hissed. Gunfire erupted, shredding the air. Tracers cut through the night like burning rain. Sarah returned fire, her scope finding shapes in the smoke. 3 on the ridge, 2 flank left. Arya relayed orders, voice firm but breathless. Bravo team suppressing fire. Delta move right. The chaos surged and broke, the sound of men shouting mixing with thunder from the mountains. Sarah saw one of the soldiers, a young corporal, freeze in the open, terror locking his body. "Move," she shouted, sprinting toward him. A bullet ripped through her pack. She didn't stop. She grabbed the corporal by his vest, dragging him behind a crumbling wall. "You breathe, you live," she said. "Understand?" He nodded, shaking, eyes wide. When she turned back toward Arya, she saw her student pinned behind a truck, exchanging fire with unseen enemies. "Cover me," Sarah barked. She sprinted across the gap, slid into cover beside Arya. "How many?" "2 left, maybe 3. Sarah glanced around the corner, spotted a muzzle flash and fired once. The return fire stopped. "2," she said. Then the world went white. An explosion tore through the ridge, shockwave knocking them both to the ground. Ears ringing, vision fractured, Sarah blinked through the dust. Arya was coughing, blood streaking her temple. What the hell was that? "Mortar, they're adjusting range," Sarah rasped. "We need to move." They crawled through debris toward the fallback line. Rourke's voice came over the comm, older now, command tone unmistakable. "Echo base to Falcon. We're tracking multiple heat signatures converging on your position. You need to exfil now." Sarah keyed her mic. "Negative, we've got wounded, we hold." Rourke's reply was immediate. "You hold, you die. That's not a debate." Arya looked at her, trembling. "Orders, ma'am." Sarah stared at the burning ridge, listening to the screams, the gunfire, the chaos. "We don't leave them," she said finally. "We finish this." They set a perimeter, dug in deep. The night became endless, smoke, fire, waiting. By dawn, only quiet remained. The enemy had pulled back, leaving wreckage and silence behind. Sarah moved through the aftermath like someone walking through memory, checking pulses, counting breaths, marking loss. It felt too familiar. Arya approached, exhaustion in every line of her body. "We held," she whispered. Sarah nodded, eyes distant. "You led." Arya hesitated. "Only because you were here." Sarah looked at her. "No, because you were ready." The younger woman swallowed, emotion breaking through her fatigue. "How do you do it? Stay calm in all that noise?" Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. "I don't. I just make sure the fear listens to me first." Later, as medevac helicopters roared overhead, Sarah sat on the tailgate of a truck, blood and dust drying on her sleeves. Rourke arrived on site, limping slightly from an old wound. He stood beside her without speaking for a while. Finally, he said, "You should have retired when you had the chance." She gave a tired smile. "You too." He looked out over the valley. "Nguyen did good." "She did better than good," Sarah said softly. "She learned when to stop fighting. That's harder than starting." Rourke nodded. "You taught her that." "Maybe," she said, "or maybe she just listened." That evening she stood alone at the edge of camp, watching the sun fall through the smoke. The horizon looked like a memory she'd already lived, too bright, too broken. Arya approached quietly. "Command's pulling us back," she said. "They're saying it's a victory." Sarah didn't turn. "Then they weren't here." Arya hesitated. "Ma'am, when you leave again, what will you do?" Sarah exhaled slowly. "Teach, same as before." "Why, after all this?" Sarah turned then, eyes steady but full of something unspoken. "Because someone always has to." The wind shifted, carrying with it the faint sound of helicopters fading into distance. She reached into her pocket, fingers brushing the worn bullet casing she'd carried for years. Her voice, when it came, was quiet, almost lost to the wind. Sometimes, she said, the only way to keep the silence alive is to walk back into the noise. What does a soldier do when the world finally grows quiet enough to hear herself think? It had been 5 years since that final deployment. The war had ended not with victory but with exhaustion. People stopped fighting because they simply couldn't anymore. Bases were dismantled, flags folded, medals pinned with quiet ceremony. And then there was silence, thick, uncertain, unfamiliar. Sarah Martinez stood at the edge of a small training field in Virginia, the sun dipping low over the tree line. The air smelled of oil and wet grass. She wasn't in uniform anymore. A plain jacket, jeans, boots worn down from miles of walking. But her posture hadn't changed. She still carried herself like someone measuring distance and wind without meaning to. She came here sometimes, to this reserve base where new recruits practiced under instructors who didn't know her name. She never interfered, just watched. Old habits didn't die. They waited quietly for her to remember them. A young officer approached, clipboard in hand. "Ma'am, visitors aren't usually allowed on the field." Sarah smiled slightly. "I used to teach here." The officer frowned, scanning the list. "Name?" "Martinez." Recognition flickered. You're the Martinez. Captain Nguyen talks about you all the time." "Nguyen," Sarah murmured, the name soft like a memory. "How is she?" "Commanding a recon battalion overseas," he said. "Still uses your line, the silence between heartbeats. She makes every recruit write it in their log." Sarah chuckled quietly. "Of course she does." The officer smiled uncertainly, sensing a story he'd never know. "Would you like to see the range?" She hesitated, then nodded. The range looked almost identical. Same wind flags. Same faint echo of shots rolling across the hills. She walked the gravel line slowly, fingertips brushing the posts. The sound of rifles struck her chest like memories, each shot a ghost of who she used to be. At the far bench sat a young girl, barely 20, hair tied back, adjusting a scope with trembling fingers. Sarah watched her struggle, heart twisting. The girl muttered to herself, frustrated just as Arya once had. Sarah stepped closer. "You're chasing it," she said. The girl startled, turning. "Ma'am." Sarah smiled gently. "You're forcing the shot. Slow down. Let it come to you." The girl blinked. I'm trying, but I can't keep the crosshairs still." "You don't," Sarah said. "No one does. You learn to move with them." The recruit adjusted, breathed, fired. The ping echoed across the field, solid, true. Her face lit up with disbelief. Sarah nodded once. "Now do it again." When she walked away, the officer was watching her. "You sure you don't want to teach again? The academy would take you in a heartbeat." Sarah's smile was wistful. "I think I already did." That evening, she sat on the hood of her old truck parked near the field's edge, watching twilight settle like dust. A soft wind moved through the grass. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the old bullet casing, the one that had followed her through every chapter of her life. It gleamed faintly in the dying light. Her mind drifted to the faces she'd carried. Rourke's grin, Diaz's steady focus, Arya's fierce, searching eyes. The sound of their voices had faded over the years, but the lessons hadn't. None of them ever did. She remembered something her grandfather had told her when she was barely tall enough to hold a rifle. The weapon doesn't lie. It only reflects who you are when you pull the trigger. She finally understood what he meant. All her life she had chased perfection, control, calm. But in the end, the weapon had reflected something deeper, not her aim, but her choices. Every shot, every silence, every time she refused to walk away. Some people left war behind. Others carried it quietly until it became something else. Wisdom, maybe, or warning. Sarah looked toward the horizon. The last recruits were leaving the field, laughing softly under the fading sky. She could hear one of them repeating her words, the silence between heartbeats. She smiled to herself. Maybe that was enough. Later at home, she placed the bullet casing on her desk beside a framed photograph, her first class of recruits, young, uncertain faces, hers among them still trying to believe she belonged. On the back of the frame, Rourke had once written a line as a joke, "For the quiet one who taught us all to listen." She traced the words with her thumb. Outside, rain began to fall, a slow, steady rhythm tapping against the window. She closed her eyes and listened. Every drop was a memory, every echo a reminder of the people who had come and gone, the choices that had carved who she'd become. When she finally spoke, it was barely above a whisper. "Sometimes dignity doesn't speak," she said. "It simply acts." And for the first time in her life, the silence didn't feel like something she had to protect. It felt like something that had protected her all along.